Okay, there it is. All right. This one's from Miravina, and I assume it's a female, but I can't be sure. But anyway, Miravina says, my boyfriend and I aren't doing so well. He was so wonderful, and he knew how to communicate with me when we were first together. But now it's like we can't talk to each other. I try to get him to talk to me about what is important between us, and he just clams up. And this is really getting old. As a guy, what do you think his problem is? Well, well, first of all, I think that's probably the most common complaint women have towards men. Usually, I mean, it's not always men. Sometimes the roles are reversed, but that's definitely pretty common. But what is unusual is you were saying that when you were first together with him, he knew how to communicate and he was open and honest with his feelings, but now he's climbing up. So typically, in my opinion, if there's a guy who once was super open and sensitive and communicative, but is all of a sudden not, there's only a couple of reasons for that. Either one, he doesn't feel understood by you, or he thinks that you won't get it. So, in other words, like if a relationship's been having a hard time, sometimes couples just give up on communicating with each other because it's like talking to a wall, right? So that could be the case. Again, I don't know any of the details, but here are some of the reasons. Either the guy doesn't feel understood and thinks you wouldn't get it, or he can't explain it. Another possibility is that he's afraid that you'll be mad, or that the relationship would be threatened if he told you the truth about what he was feeling. That's also a possibility. It's really those are the only two. Either he doesn't feel understood and he's given up on communicating, or he's afraid to tell you for some reason. Either that you'll be mad, or you'll break up with him, or who knows. But really, as with always, the only way out of this is you got to talk to him about it. And a lot of guys are really stoic, and they're tough. But if it's something big, like, don't just blame him or judge him immediately, for being a douchebag. Try to talk to him about it and see what's wrong, and say, hey, I've noticed you've been distant or not talking to me. What's going on? And you'll know by now whether or not, I'm sure you've tried it already. If he can't have that conversation with you, then yeah, that's a bigger issue. But as always, communication is the way. So anyway, what do you guys think about that? Any comments would be great. My mom says, if a guy says the wrong thing, it can come back to haunt him. That's true. I do know a lot of guys, and I really hate to admit this, but in my last relationship, it did get to the point that I was afraid to communicate, which is tough, and that's a big possibility. So in other words, you want to make sure that you are rewarding him for communicating. If every time he communicates with you, if you freak out on him or whatever, then that's probably not going to help. So the whole point of this thing with, talking to him about it is to try to let him know he doesn't have to be afraid and that he can communicate, assuming that he really can with you. If you yourself are not evolved enough to, handle the truth or have a compassionate conversation, then that's an issue. Hey, we all got to work on ourselves. So that's my 2 cents. But Mom says if a guy says the wrong thing, it can come back to haunt him. Well said, Mom. I've been there. Hellbent says, I learned long ago to communicate only when allowed by the wife. Well, I love my doggy house. Well said, Hellbent. I love that. Oh, Gex says, it got late. I'm heading to bed now. Thanks for the stream. It was great as always. Gex, I hope you're sleeping tight in Ireland, and I'm jealous. Phaser says maybe he has nothing to say or add. Again, and that goes back to, I think, one of the 2 possibilities, that he's given up communicating. He doesn't feel understood, doesn't think you would get it, doesn't think you'd understand, doesn't think you'd listen, right? So that's another possibility. So he's got nothing left to say. Or maybe Phaser Face is saying he's just not an emotional guy and doesn't have to say stuff. That's also true. But if it's a big deal, usually the guy will have something to say on it, like if it's a big relationship challenge or something that's threatening it. So that's my take. Moving on real quick, just so we don't bore those of you to death that don't have attention spans, because I know I'm one of the only guys that likes this kind of stuff. Miss Lurkey, weigh in if you'd like as well, because I really enjoyed your wisdom last time. All right. This one's pretty heavy, and it was like I started like Gex says you have to be jealous. Mom says you're the non-speaking guru. Oh, Hellbent, I love you. That was hilarious. You have to be jealous, yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, so here's the next one. This one's a little bit heavier. This one's from Robin. It says, I found out a few months ago that my husband had been having an affair, and I'm still crushed. I asked for a separation, and I have been trying to focus on me, but I still love him greatly. My mother suggested counseling, which I didn't want to do, but I thought I owed it to the relationship to try. We saw a counselor for a month and are now trying to start over together. I have forgiven him, so that's not an issue. I'm just really scared of being hurt again, so I feel like I have a wall up, and I'm wondering if it's really possible to come back from something like this. The counselor says it's totally possible, but I'm not sure. Any experience with something like this? I wanted to pick this question to close out the week because I actually have had a little experience with something like this, and I know a lot of you have. Oh, and Miss Lurky says, she asked for a guy's opinion, so I'm just sitting here learning. That's awesome. Well, any case, wow. So, a recap, this woman's husband had an affair, crushed her, but they're trying to work it out, and a counselor says that it's possible and to give it another shot. And so she's trying, but she feels like she has a wall up. And that's really, really interesting. Roger Waters never walked away from his wall. So that's what Phaser says. Well, that's funny. But, I think that this is a great... wow, I mean, I picked this one because I have 5 other questions like this that are almost exactly the same. But this one I think is the best because it's going into trying to figure out if you can move on in a relationship after something like that happens. I went through a similar situation, and the counselor said the same thing because it was the only time in my life I ever went to a counselor because, the girl, wanted that. And I was like, okay, I figured it was going to be bullshit, but the counselor said, oh yeah, it's totally possible and all this, you can totally come back from this. But I remember before that, I asked my father, and I was going through a very similar situation, and I'm like, I still love this person, but I really don't know. Can you actually come back from this? Am I strong enough to come back from this? And I asked my dad, and my dad looks at me and he says, anything's possible, and I want to believe it's possible, but he gets this sadness on his face, and he looks at me, but I've been on this planet for a long time, and I've seen this situation in countless relationships, and never once have I seen a couple actually come through something like that, if it's bad. What usually happens, he said, is that they'll try to get back together afterwards, like after a short separation period, and then it doesn't work out. The magic's gone in the relationship, and they let it go. So I'm not saying this to be depressing because I believe it is true. You definitely can move beyond this. Here's a couple things that I've learned about this. For one, women are far more evolved in this area than men are usually. There's exceptions to every rule. But most of the women I know, they don't take like cheating or infidelity as seriously as men do. And they're usually a little bit more spiritually evolved. So I would say that because you're a woman, you have a head start. Women are usually the only people I've ever met that have been able to come or overcome that kind of a problem. So absolutely. But I think really in the end, it boils down to your level of spiritual development. Forgiveness is great, but you might find that years down the road, it's not that you can't forgive the person. It's a trust issue, and you'll find yourself always trying to figure out how to protect yourself around that human being. But that's just what happens to me. You see, men, they have a biological connection. Like infidelity there kind of affects men on a physical level. That's a lot harder to get rid of, and there's a lot of ego involved, with that for men. So it's a lot, if you're a guy and you're experiencing that, I think it's a lot less likely that you're going to be able to actually get through it. You'll get back together, and then it'll fall apart in a few years, and you'll kick yourself for doing it. I think women, absolutely. Women are more evolved, and they have a higher chance of getting through this. As far as the differences biologically between men and women when it comes to cheating, that's a whole nother stream. So we'll get into that another time. But That is all I can say. In the meantime, a lot of people have to try, and that's great. And it's not a depressing thing. I'm sure this is possible. And because you're a woman, you've got a great head start. And if you really love the guy, and if you have that level of consciousness to be able to move through that without resentment or anything like that, or blaming, and really move past it, then heck yeah, you can get through this. So best of luck. But that's my 2 cents on it. And let's see what chat has to say. Miss Lurky says, oh wait, I'm sorry, let me get into the right spot. Hellbent says, it would be tough to ever really be full in the relationship. Always a part of your mind will be wondering, festering, building, running through the pain. Life will find you. Hellbent, that is what happened to me. And it wasn't, again, a matter of forgiveness. It was just that, I couldn't open myself as much as I would have liked to in the relationship, and that really sucks. So that's what happened to me. But in the end, I still look back, it's not somebody else's problem. That's my lack of spiritual evolution. The fact that if somebody is stuck in their head and wondering and festering and fearing, that's their spiritual issue. Oftentimes, the person who cheated is changed and has evolved and become a totally new person, and it's not fair to hold the past against them. That is true in a lot of cases, but it takes a big amount of spiritual development, forgiveness. You got to be wise to be able to handle something like that. And when it happened to me, I was young enough and stupid enough that I wasn't really able to move past it. I just couldn't open up enough, and that's not fair to do to somebody, especially if they have changed and they're wonderful all of a sudden. You still can't let go. That's our problem. Miss Lurky says, yeah, like Phaser says, I think it'll always be there, but it doesn't mean you can't still love the other person and move on. But forgetting will take either a very long time or is impossible. Miss Lurky, that is true, and I was really ashamed with myself. I mean, I never would forget, I never did, but there was no resentment or anything, but just, you have to structure your life differently, once that happens to you with a person. You can't leave yourself open in certain circumstances, and really that's not giving the relationship your all, which I think is kind of a cop-out, and I was guilty of that once. So I'm looking back and thinking about it that way. Princess Tam says, trust is a fragile thing, and once broken, it is not a thing that can be repaired. You can forgive, but never forget. Yeah, see, there's another gal that, admits to that truth. Thunder agrees with Tam there. My mom says, walls can be all right. Every mammal has boundaries. True. For me, I enjoyed having the wall up, but it wasn't enough for the other person, and I had to respect that, And Miss Lurky says, trust is everything, really. It is. I heard once, somebody wise told me that for a relationship to work, you need 3 things. You need love, trust, and respect. And without trust, that's tough. But I always considered myself spiritually evolved enough not to need to trust, Because, something you'll hear me say is always you can't get angry when a human being does something like cheats because they're acting according to their level of consciousness at the time. That's what Eckhart Tolle keeps telling us, right? So, in other words, I love that. Eckhart Tolle comes out and says, no, people aren't responsible for their actions. And I've had this experience where you could find somebody who's perfect, pure as the driven snow. But the only reason why they haven't betrayed yet is that they haven't had the appropriate stimulus or haven't had the opportunity. What it really boils down to is that human beings are not perfect. And so you can never trust a human being, but you can trust the universe, right? You can trust somebody's true self. And to really get that point, again, this is another stream, but that's a spiritual issue, and it's tough. It's not easy. Phaser says, I heard once that if you were to break a priceless piece of china, like a part of a tea set, gluing it together and still thinking it was the value that it had, you were sadly mistaken. That's true. But, I think for a lot of us, and like the questioner here, I understand that feeling, that she's feeling like she owes it to the relationship to try, even though it sounds like in her heart she knows it's over. She doesn't think she can come back from it. Doesn't have faith in that. And I think part of us has to believe that we're capable of being mature enough to move beyond something like that. But in conclusion, To the questioner, Robin, I think it's definitely possible, and I understand if you feel that it's necessary or you owe it to the relationship to try. But to answer you, in my experience, I've never seen it work out. I've seen people get back together after an event like that, and they'll last for maybe a couple of years if they're lucky, and then it'll fall apart, and they both wish that they wouldn't have tried again. So that's all I've ever seen, but anything is possible. And the degree to which you can get rid of your ego will be the degree to which you guys can prosper in a new relationship. So the best of luck to you. Thank you guys for your input. That was wonderful, by the way. And everybody, let's raise a glass to Robin for having the courage to write to me about that. I had to pick this one again because I've had a little experience with it, and I asked myself the same question once in my life. So best of luck, and I hope it works out. Cheers.